The tech sector has long been identified with the West Coast, starting with the Silicon Valley and then moving up the coast to Seattle. And for just about as long as that, it's generally thought to have leaned really pretty much to the left, with a few notable exceptions such as Peter Thiel. But some leaders are breaking from the pack, including Peter Rex, head of the eponymous investment firm that specializes in tech and real estate investment. Mr. Rex has moved his firm to Austin, Texas, not least because of the politics. And we welcome him now. So welcome, Mr. Rex. Good to have you here. I want to get this really clear because I talk about politics, but it's more than that. It's the lifestyle, particularly for the families of the people who work in your firm.
Yeah, David. Well, great to be on. And exactly. I mean, I think a lot of people are looking at the taxes and thinking that's what's driving everybody, but it's not for tax reasons. I think we need to abstract up a layer there and take a look at what ultimately is the signal, what's driving people to move. And if you think about our company as a case in point, we are located in Seattle, Washington. A lot of people don't realize Washington does not have state income tax. So what made us move? Well, it was faith, family, and freedom. And long term, I think that's what we're going to continue to see those as key drivers, moving people into states that are long on people and short on government.
So I want to try to separate, if we can, the faith part from the government part. Maybe we can't, but let's try for a moment, because I was struck in reading what you had to write, the issue of faith. And I don't think it's so much faith within your company as for the people who work in your company and the way they want to raise their children, their families in a community of faith. And you found that difficult on the West Coast. Is that a fair description?
Well, I think the reason why I say faith, family, freedom is because these three are intertwined. So to have economic freedom allows you to also be able to raise your kids in the way you want. And I'm going to give you a case in point here. One of the catalysts, I'd say a key catalyst to us making the move when we did, was realizing that a lot of our employees could not afford a home increasingly in the West Coast. And some, it seemed, would be out of reach, almost indefinitely of buying a home. And they had young families. And when we moved here to Texas, those same people have been able to buy a home. And that, as a CEO, gives me a lot of joy. But beyond that, that means it's happy employees, happy company, right, as a businessman. But when we tie that back into faith, we can see that those people can now have the economic freedom because of a lower cost of housing to be able to raise their kids in maybe a different way, send them to the private school if they don't like the public schools, maybe homeschooling, whatever it might be their prerogative in raising their children.
What causes that ramping up of housing prices to the point that a middle-class family or even upper-middle-class family can't afford it? Is that income and wealth inequality? In fact, is that what's driving it? Because there are enough people around who can spend that kind of money on a house?
I mean, that is a factor, and that's a factor that a lot of people point to. But I think an underlying, much more important factor is policy behind what is the goals of the local government. If the goal is to develop housing units, well, that would increase total supply of housing, which would drive down the price of housing. Just simple, economics there. And when you don't have that as your goal to get low-cost housing, you end up with a situation where prices keep going up. And for a real estate owner or an investor, that's a good thing, right? But it's not a good thing for families. It's not a good thing for people. And I think Texas, you can see, takes a different approach where they always seem to, they'll have big demands coming in, which will surge up pricing. But because of the policy they have, you'll see a lot of developers come out because it's a very entrepreneurial-oriented economy, but also because I think ultimately underlying policy allows this to happen, where they'll start developing a lot of houses, and then there'll be infrastructure as well with highways to be able to get to these houses, which means when you have infrastructure, cheaper land, right? Because you can get highways out to land far out, which then will decrease the cost of land inside. Ultimately, a lot of these things are very complex, but I think this gets to the root of high-cost housing, and it comes down to public policy.
It's interesting because you, as I understand, are a fairly substantial investor in real estate yourself. And when it comes to your business, as opposed to making sure you have good lives for the families who are part of your business, but your business itself, does that mean that actually real estate investment in some of the areas like Seattle, like San Francisco, are good investments because of that restrictive housing policy?
Well, I think, and this is not a good thing, but in the past, yes, I would say that was the case. But ultimately, even for myself, we've been ahead of the curve, both in moving out of the West Coast. I think we were the first company that raised the flag and just get out of there. But we also were, back in 2009, we bet long on the economy of the U.S. on a rebound during the crash in 2009. And we bet on Texas and Florida even then. And I could have picked areas that had policies that I felt were against human flourishing, such as Seattle and San Francisco, which would ultimately, fill my pocketbook with more money. But in the 10, 20, 30-year period, and that's the way I look at things, it will not benefit the local economy because you can't do what's wrong for people and ultimately benefit your pocketbook. So I bet on Texas and Florida, and that's really where the super majority of my holdings are in real estate.
So as you look to move your firm, first of all, how many people do you think you're going to be moving from Seattle to Austin, Texas, or have you moved already?
Well, we've already moved, and it's been an extremely painful process to do so, as you can imagine. And I had a fourth kid coming in my family as we were making the move. But we have been putting the pieces back together and getting things back working. And I'd say we are grounded and we're landed and ready to expand here. But we have about 500 or so in the company in total. Not everybody did move, by the way.
That was my question, actually. How many did you bring with you? Because typically when a company moves across country, you lose a fair number of employees.
Yeah, we did lose some, but we've been lucky that a lot of the ones that we really needed to make the move were on board with it, and some of those things came down to housing prices and things like that really the spouse got behind as well, and it became something easy to do. In addition, you got to remember 6 or 7 or 8 months ago when we made this decision, we literally had Antifa people burning a car within view of where we had an office. And in view of my home, actually, I could see the smoke coming up. So those things also were very helpful in making the move successfully for the employees. As you can imagine, that type of fear when you're really, almost locked in your home and people are out in the streets rioting and stuff is, in a counterintuitive way, actually made the move, easier for us. And now we're ahead of the curve again, because right now what we're doing is we're here on the ground, and we've been working real diligently. And what we're working on is creating a new tech power structure, and we're serious about it. We've been working on it. We're going to keep building that out. It's going to be out of Texas, and that's going to be a check on Silicon Valley, and that's what needs to happen.
And by the way, from my experience, Austin's not a bad place to live. There's an awful lot going on in Austin. Thank you so much. Really good to talk to you about this. That's the head of Rex investment firm, Peter Rex.